we should be live. Let's see if we are. I see you waving, except I don't see you waving. I just see a blank screen here. So, oh, there you go. There we go. We do it. Oh, excuse me. What a good time for a burp.
We do exist.
We do exist.
Well,
we're not just a legend in our own lunchtime.
Goodness me, what a day, what a day. And here we are. It's still a day.
We exist, but does anybody see us? That's the question.
Know. Are we really on?
We are really on, but I don't see anybody.
You know, maybe nobody's coming because it's not the normal night. We'll just go ahead and do our reading.
Well, there you go then.
And they can catch up later.
Sod you then.
I see a word on this page that kind of makes me have a
Oh, are you starting then?
Chapter 21.
20 bleeding 1.
The moon was 2 days off her full, and the barometer was falling, so I knew that the halcyon days could not last forever. After the evening meal, we went out to the point and watched the shadow of Bell Head shorten over the sea as the moon rose higher and higher. One could only go out along the rocks in single file, and Morgan was on ahead of me, and she was paying no attention to me, and I saw she wanted to be alone with her thoughts, so I did not follow her out to the end, but sat down on the remains of a balustrading?
Balustrading, yes, they're like parapets kind of thing.
Okay, smoking and watching her. She stood for a long time, looking out over the moonlit sea till the shadow of the down drew into her feet. Then she turned and looked at the moon. With the moonlight full upon her, she was like a statue, so still and perfectly formed. Then she raised her arms to the sky till they looked like the horns of the moon, and began to sing one of her strange songs that she'd been singing to me on and off for the last few days. And that had, I think, contributed not a little to my restless and disturbed state. But by the time she was singing with the power of evocation. But this time, she was singing. O Isis veiled on earth but shining clear, in the high heaven now the full moon draws near. Hear the invoking words, hear and appear. Shadi Elchia and a Binaji.
Impelled by what power I do not know, I rose and walked towards her, and as I got close enough to see her face in the moonlight, I saw that it was not Morgan Le Fay at all, and the eyes were strange and wide and inhuman, not even the eyes of the sea priestess, but of the sea goddess herself. She raised her arms like the horns of Hathor, and she sang to the moon and the sea. I am she who was ere the earth was formed, was ere Bina Gi. I am that soundless, boundless, bitter sea, out of whose deeps life wells eternally. Astarte, Aphrodite, Ashtoreth, giver of life and bringer in of death. Hera in heaven, on earth Persephone, Levana of the tides and Hecate. All these am I, and they are seen in me. The hour of the high full moon draws near. I hear the invoking words, hear and appear. Isis unveiled, and Bina Gi. I call unto the priest that calleth me.
Oh, and I knew that whether I liked it or not, I was cast for the part of the priest of the sea. Morgan's arm came slowly down from the sign of the horns of the moon till they were horizontal, and then they began to work backwards and forwards with curious stroking motion, to which long, loose sleeves lent the appearance of slowly beating wings. The wailing, humming rhythms, rising and falling of the quarter tones and the recurrent rhymes held me as a bird is held by the snake. And step by step I came towards her, till my outstretched palms were pressed against hers, and I suddenly realized I had not got a woman's hands in mind, but the two poles of a powerful battery.
Wow.
The vibrations of all the ancient rituals by which men have ever invoked the gods had awakened in that strange singing voice of hers, and I knew that with the touch of her hand she had indeed brought something down from the heaven that passed from her to me and to the earth. The tide was rising and the ground swell was washing softly over the rock where we stood, touching the foot, touching the ankle, threatening danger. A cloud passed over the moon, and we were in darkness. A cold breath of wind from the northwest came soughing over the water, and I knew that the weather had broken. Following the wind, a wave ran in and broke on the rocks, and another, and I saw Morgan's drapery afloat in the water, and drew her towards me, she following like a sleepwalker. It was a risky business bringing this blindly moving woman through the ankle-deep water over the broken rocks in the dark to the waves breaking white behind us and the wind rising, but foot by foot I did it and got her safely to the steps. I was too busy thinking about our mutual safety to think about myself, but as I got her down into the forecourt where the light of the window shone out and we could see what we were doing, she suddenly opened her eyes and looked at me like an aroused from a deep sleep, and I knew that something strange had passed between us.
The next day, it all seemed like a dream. Morgan Le Fay did not refer to it, and neither did I. There are some things that are broken if one speaks of them. The wind rose and the cold rain fell, and we did not go out to the point or up on the down all that day, but sat over the fire and read and had very little to say to each other. But towards bedtime, as we were sitting over the drying fire, I had a sudden impulse to take the reading lamp that stood at my elbow and go down to the far end of the long room and study the design I had roughed in across the wide expense of plaster, broken only by a door in the corner. The design was that of the deep sea palaces, with their iridescent domes like bubbles in the foam, and the crests of the waves curled over them for a sky. Sea snakes twined around their pillared porticos, and the treasure of sunk galleons lay scattered about their courts. In the centre, seated on the throne of the kings of the sea, was a figure in silvery drapery like breaking waves, which I had planned should be Morgan Le Fay when the inspiration came to paint her face. But it had not yet come, and only the shadowy outline of features was faintly indicated. But as I stood there holding the lamp in one hand and picking over my brushes with the other, I knew that the time had come when I could do that face. Morgan Le Fay was half asleep over her book at the other end of the big room, paying no attention to me, and I got to work, holding the lamp in one hand and painting with the other in the uncertain wavering light as best I might. I needed no model, for I knew her so well, every line and every curve of her.
He's not obsessed, is he?
No, not at all.
But as I painted, I saw that it was not the face of Morgan Le Fay that was taking from under my brush, but a man's face, fine features, aesthetic not of this world, and the eyes were most marvelously living eyes that I never could have seen on a canvas, although I painted them myself. They looked straight at me, and I looked straight back at them. Then I know not what impulse possessed me, but I painted Morgan Le Fay's great crystal between the hands. A crystal is a very difficult thing to paint, but I did it, and it caught the light as if it were lit from within. As I finished and stepped back to look at the results, not knowing what to make of it, I heard a sound behind me. And there was Morgan Le Fay. She looked at it, at what I had done, for a long moment. Then she turned to me and said, "That is the priest of the moon."
Dun, dun, dun.
Chapter 22.
Shall I?
Sure.
Okay. It was very difficult for me to convey any idea of what it meant to me to get into touch with the priest of the moon. I've already told of my experience in contracting the invisible energy behind appearances, which is to their outer form as the personality of a man to his body. I have told of the power that has come to me to see the past living again. It is not for me to deal with the metaphysics of these things. I only know that they were experiences like no other I have ever had, and they had far-reaching effects on my life. It is by this last I judge them, and not by the arguments that can be advanced pro or con. They represent the workings of the subconscious, I am quite prepared to agree, for they are entirely beyond the range and scale of the normal scope of consciousness. That they are such stuff as dreams are made of, I am equally prepared to agree, for they are more akin in their nature to the life of sleep than the life of action. But having said this, have we all written them off as bad dead? Excuse me. Have we not still to define what we mean by sleep and subconsciousness? I am not prepared, not in these pages anyway, to say what I mean by them, because I do not know. To me, they are finger posts, not labels. When I am satisfied that I've got the soul safely done up in a brown paper with a bit of string round it, then I will tie a label to it, but not before then. Until then, I think signposts are safer and less likely to let one in for foolishness, for they point to the direction, which is helpful, but set no limits, which is a futile thing to do in the present state of our knowledge. I will therefore be content to describe, and leave to other folk to classify according to taste. There was an old dame near us who for many years replied to all sorts of inquiries about her son, that he was in Bristol Infirmary. Finally, someone got suspicions and asked her which ward he was in, and elicited the information that he wasn't in a ward at all, but in the museum. So I can at least serve as a specimen, if not a tutor, instructing by what I am rather than by what I say.
I have seen a lot of inspirational pictures in my time, and they are all right as long as the artist sticks to clouds and drapery. But as soon as they try to do figures and faces, it makes one pin one's hopes to total extinction. Knowing this, I had the sense to keep my figures shadowy. For, say what you like, the soul cannot transcend the hand when it comes to craftsmanship. The features of the priest of the moon were therefore but dimly seen, and the imagination had to build upon the completed picture. I did not represent my priest, but evoked him. There is a whole theory of art in that, but it is not my business at the moment. The outward eye saw colored shadows, and it was out of one's knowledge one completed the picture. If one knew nothing, one saw nothing. If one knew something, one saw a lot. It is not for me to judge my pictures. They have interested, competent judges, and we'll leave it at that. Old Whittles said it was a pity I did not finish them. The vicar said they were depraved. My sister said they were silly. Scotty said he wouldn't have one if you paid him. My Bond Street pal wanted me to go in for painting professionally, but it is too much like hard work to suit me, and no one cannot take a partner.
You have to paint by yourself,
Yep.
don't you?
Whatever may be said of my pictures, and they always evoke violent partisanship, it has been a liberal education to paint them. But the things that mattered was not the aesthetics of the business, but what came of it. Through those pictures, the priest of the moon came into my life, and he was a very curious person to know, even more curious than Morgan Le Fay, and God knows she was odd enough. It may seem a strange thing to say, but for the shadowy figure that had come to the surface in this drawing, I had the same kind of feeling that I had for a dynamic personality. I have not met a great many in my life, Dickford not being a prolific of such. I guess not. Or if they appear driving them to drink and the devil early in their career. I have met one or two among the barristers, and some old judges must have been pretty potent in their day, though the kick has usually gone out of them by the time they get to the bench. My Bond Street pal was a personality in his way. My sister, too, in her way, if you call it that way. Those, I think, were all. No one else ever met could see much beyond the next meal.
I judge a personality not so much by what they say or even by what they do, but by the way they affect you. For a person may do a lot in the world by virtue of the start he has been given in life, or because he's got something that he's wanted at the moment. But that does not constitute a personality as I use the word. A personality fetches a reaction out of you of one sort or another, and it need not necessarily be a pleasant reaction. Anything more unpleasant than my sister you would go a long way to find. And I stir up a good deal of dislike too, especially locally, because I go my own way and pay no attention to anybody, and a country town hates that. A personality stimulates you. Whether to save your soul or lose it is immaterial in my definition. The priest of the moon had personality in a very marked degree, and if he was the product of my subconscious, I am proud of it. There were times, not infrequent, when I would used to wonder what he was, and whether I was deluding myself or whether I was loopy. But each time I met him afresh, I knew what he was, beyond all doubting, and he left his mark on me. At first, excuse me, I thought he was the sea priest, who had been so wroth over my impertinence when I was being sacrificed, and I was scared because I reckoned that an enemy had picked up my trail. Then I began to see that this was not so, but that he was something altogether bigger than that. It seemed to me that this was the priest who was behind Morgan Le Fay, who had brought her away from Atlantis when his knowledge told him that the final catastrophe was due. I could not see the scene clearly, as if it were a picture vividly stamped on memory. The sacred city built around the mountain had been a volcano, just as Pompeii and Herculaneum were built within historical times. I could see the wide alluvial plain that stretched away to a far range of mountains, laid bare by the receding sea, just as the marshes stretched forth toward Dickford and the hills behind. And at the very verge of the land and water rose the great cone, as it might be Bell Knoll. The cone was flat on top, not pyramidal, because in some previous cataclysm it had blown off its crater, as volcanoes do. And on this level crest were the white buildings of the sacred clan, the great sun temple with its open court paved with the black and white of alternate marble and basalt, and its two pillars that were twin gnomons of tidal dial vast as the court, one for the sun and one for the moon, and calculations that were made upon the way the shadows crossed the squares. It was the prototype, Morgan told me, of the temple of Solomon the king, and all other temples of the mysteries take after it.
Around the temple were buildings with porticos and colonnades, beams spanned for the Atlanteans, though they knew much wisdom had not got the secret of the arch any more than the ancient Egyptians had. These were the houses of the priests and the scribes that served the temple, and beyond them was the house of virgins, built around the court, with no windows looking outward. It was there that Morgan Le Fay grew into womanhood. Within were courts, leading one into another, and surrounded by rooms and colonnades, and there were sunken stone tanks with steps leading down to them, where the sacred lilies grew, and over them leant trees, not unlike mulberry trees, but ancient and gnarled, from whose bark oozed the fragrant resins they burned in the temples. The young priestesses sat under the trees, spinning with a spindle and a whirl that are more ancient than the wheel. I think that they had not the use of the wheel in Atlantis any more than they knew about the arch. From the house of the virgins, an underground way led to a temple, and the priests from whom all passion had gone watched over the upbringing of the young priestesses in the care of the wise woman. By this way they were brought into the temple on occasion, required never setting eyes on the outside world nor any undedicated man, and by this way they were returned when their work was done, not always virgin.
Ooh.
Beneath the temple was a way led by the path of lava to the very heart of the ancient volcano. Herein was hollowed out a crypt where a rising jet of flame burnt continually, telling those who had eyes to see that the mountain was not dead, but sleeping. This flame, lit by the earth herself, was to them the symbol of their faith, for all fires are one in nature, though after three kinds: volcanic, solar, and terrestrial. It was the leaping of this flame that warned the priest of the moon that a catastrophe long foretold was at hand.
Now, the priest of the moon was other than those who served the flame. There was a young man. He had been taken and trained as they had been. He had seen that the worship had fallen. He had seen that the worship had fallen on evil days, and had gone back, as men must, to an older and purer faith, tracing the river to the rill till he came to the pure source. And he worshipped the Great Mother under her forms of moon and sea. And in this he was wise, for with her are hidden the secrets of human life, though with the All-Father are the keys of the Spirit. In his prime, he set out to seek a land where life might be lived unsullied by the decay of a dying race, and he travelled with the tin ships to the islands of the sea, where the marts of the Sea King's trade were established, far marts, where people brought strange things, the blue and purple dyes, and medicinal plants, and silver. And when the time came that the leaping flame gave warning, the ancient priest of the sun, too feeble for that far journey, yet knowing what drew near, prepared to die with his temple. And he gave into the hands of the younger man the secret scrolls and sacred symbols. And they went by night to the underground way, to the house of the virgins, and looked at the young girls as they slept in the moonlight, and chose one who had been prepared to serve their purpose, and roused her and led her away, wrapped in a dark cloak, while the others slept.
After she saw for the first and last time by the moonlight the wide spaces of the plain where the spearmen and javelin throwers learnt their skill, and horsemen rode the two-toed horse, and she went down to the winding professional way to the shore and to the sea, and the land wind blowing at dawn filled their sails, and they went swiftly. For a day and a night and a day they went, the rowers toiling till they met their trades. Then upon the third morning, in the hour between dark and dawn, 3 great billows heaved their ship at the sea floor, shook, and when the sun rose they saw a dark pillar of smoke, a cloud where was once the lost Atlantis. And the priests of the moon, traveling by way of the thrice-vexed Bermuths and the Azores, brought the young girl, who was to be his priestess, to a place he had prepared in the holy isle that is off the Isle of the Druids, looking towards the Isle of Saints, which is Ireland. And there he left her in the care of wise women, to be trained in the terrible discipline of the priesthood, he himself coming and going about the wild land, watching its ways, and men calling him Merlin.
And when the time came that the summons was sent, they brought the young priestess, now grown and trained, to the priests who had their sacred college on Belknol. And there befell that of which I have already told, so that the sacrifice was in vain. And the sea came in and took the land, and by all the waterways of the marshes the tides rose, and meadow and field fell back to the sea. And men that had ploughed and sown became fishers and hunters again, living in huts on piles among the reeds, who had known stone-built forts and timbered palaces. And Morgan le Fay, priestess of the sea and half-sister of the king, sat in her palace in the island valley of Avalon, and watched the magic well, the things to come unfolding. And she saw her brother, the king, betrayed by his faithless queen, and the wise Merlin, led by the young witch Vivian, and all the evil that comes to lands and men, when the sacred hearth fires die untended. Chapter 23. Ooh.
I told Morgan all these things, but she would not say very much. All I could get her to say was, "Your dreams march with mine." "Morgan," I said, "what is the truth?" "You are not the first man to ask that question," she said. "I think I'll go and have a wash, the same as him," I said, seeing there was nothing to be got out of her. When I got back, she was busy making supper, dressed in a long flowing dress of wine-colored velvet. The big wing sleeves looped back and forth to her shoulders and showing the silvery lining, leaving her arms free for what she was doing among the copper pots and casseroles. She had lovely arms, rounded, firm, muscled, the skin smoothly, opaquely white, the hands not small but long-fingered, and the supple and elegant in way she had learned among the Latins. I sat down in my usual chair at the far end of the long, narrow table and watched her. She was making a fanciful French dish that is supposed to catch fire as it cooks. Flambé. And presently it blazed up, and we sat down to our meal. There was no chance of talking while she was doing this, for it was a tricky business, and she took her cooking seriously. A lot more seriously than I took my painting, or even my house agenting, moreover. Morgan would never talk to a man until she had fed him, a rule she had learned among the South American presidents, who were quick with their guns. But when I was fed, I was smoking and drinking my coffee, she suddenly said to me, "What is truth, Wilfred?" "That was what I have been asking you," I said, "and you snubbed me." "No, I wasn't," she said, ignoring my innuendo. "You asked me what was the truth concerning a certain matter, and I'm asking you what is truth in itself. We cannot deal with the particular until we have dealt with the general." "What is truth, Wilfred?" "God knows," I said, "what it is in general, but you know all right what it is in particular instance, whether you choose to tell me or not." "I am not so sure that I do," said she. "What do you imagine to be the truth about me, Wilfred?" "Sometimes I think one thing, Morgan Le Fay," said I, "and sometimes I think another. It just depends how I happen to be feeling at the moment." She laughed. "I expect that is about as near to the truth as we shall ever get," she said, "for that is exactly my position too. Sometimes I think one thing about myself, and sometimes I think another. As long as I believe in myself, I find I can do certain things. If I cease to believe in myself, I think I should just crumble into dust like an unwrapped mummy. There is more than one kind of truth. A thing that does not exist in our three-dimensional world may exist in a fourth dimension and be real in its way." "And what may the fourth dimension be?" I said. "I am incapable of the mathematics of the matter," said Morgan. "But for all practical purposes, I take mind as the fourth dimension and find it works. That's good enough for me." "It isn't good enough for me," I said. "I wanted to understand things a bit better than that before I prepared to trust them." "You will never understand things until you trust them, for you inhibit what you doubt."
Wow. There's a wisety.
"And you will never know if the ice will bear you unless you go onto it, and then if it won't, you go through. And you will never make custards without breaking eggs, and that's what has to be done about it. I don't know what you mean about it, but I know what I mean to do." "What is that?" "Take my precautions and take my risks." I offered no comment, and she asked for none. She knew that when it came to the point where she led, I would follow. She being her. "I can show you things that I can't tell you, Wilfred," she said. "Very curious things. I don't pretend to understand them, but I know that they work. Leave them alone for the present, because the moon will be waning by next weekend, and come back to me at the next full moon, and I will show you."
Dun, dun, dun. Chapter 24, would you believe? Morgan's instructions to keep away till the next full moon meant that I did not see her for a month. It was the first time I had missed my weekend since she came to the fort, and a very long month it seemed.
Well, what was wrong with the new moon?
It taught me pretty unequivocally that Morgan meant to be, what Morgan meant to me, and the part she played in my life, and what life would be like without her. By the end of that month, my mother and sister were seriously considering my original offer to set them up in a separate establishment. What Morgan did during that time I do not know, but when I came out again, there was a curious, subtle difference about the fort I cannot define, and the smell of cedar and sandal had soaked into it, till the whole place was redolent. The fort felt like a harp that had been tuned, ready for use, and every now and again, like an aeolian harp, faint, sighing sounds came from it spontaneously. I shall never forget the curious, tense expectancy of the atmosphere and the all-pervading odour of the incense woods.
Well, it's true, because sometimes you feel like the music's on at the store, even though it's not.
May I continue?
Oh, yes, please.
There was something curious about the sea too, that it was not easy to describe. It seemed as if it had come much nearer to us and could at will flow in and fill all the rooms. And yet it was not a drowning and an alien element, for a kinship had been established between us and the sea, and we would be able to breathe in its waters as if we were amphibian. I cannot put into words the curious sense I received of being made free of the sea, as if no wave would ever sweep me off the point, but I could walk down into the depths as I could walk out into a fog, conscious of a denser medium, but not of an alien element. Morgan gave me a very odd supper. There was almond curds, such as the Chinese make, and scallops in their shells, and little crescent honey cakes like marzipan for dessert, all white things. And this curious pallid dinner table was relieved by a great pile of pomegranates in an earthenware dish in the centre.
It is moon food,
said Morgan, smiling. And if you eat the pomegranates, I said, you never come back, and took one. We didn't do anything that night, but just sat over the fire. I tried to amuse Morgan with anecdotes of Dickford, but it wouldn't work. The atmosphere was too tense, and we went early to bed.
I went early to sleep too, or at least I think I did. I dreamed a very curious dream. It seemed to me in my dream that I was standing in the big living room downstairs, and that all the pictures on the wall were real and not painted on plaster, and that the priest of the moon on his throne was real too, and he came forward and stood beside me in the strange, high-headed dress, like the crown of Upper Egypt. I looked into his eyes, and he looked into mine, and I felt more perfect confidence in him than I have felt in any living being. We went out together, moving the floating movement of sleep. The glass of the great windows offered no impediment to our passage, and we passed on to the point where the poor mooncalf had perished, and set out over the sea. And then I found myself on that high tabular peak of Atlantis, where the sacred college had stood. Through whether it was sunk in the great Atlantic deep or high in the air, I do not know. My guide had gone, and before me were two figures veiled in misty light. I could see neither of their face nor form, but only the shadowy sweep of the robes and the great folded wings behind them. What they said to me, or I said to them, I shall never know, for nothing remained in mystery save that I knelt on the knee before them upon the rock plateau, and iridescent opalescent light played all around me. And there was in my soul a reverence so profound and awe so great that ever afterwards life has seemed to me a sacrament. Then I found my guide beside me again, and we were far out over the sea, and presently I saw the rocky point of Bellhead below, and we passed over the place where the poor mooncalf had died, and we were back whence we started, and I woke up in bed. That is all there is to tell. It might have been a dream, but it was a dream like no other dream I'd ever had, and it changed my whole life. One thing and one thing only had I brought back with me through the veil that was dropped as I returned. I knew that my dedication had been accepted, and that I was the chosen of the sea priestess to be sacrificed and provide the power for whatever ends she had in view, whether the land was to be saved from the sea, or whether the sea was to regenerate the land.
I started to tell Morgan of my experience when I came down next morning, but she held up a hand and stopped me. I know everything, she said. Do not talk about it. I was glad of this, for I felt that to talk might cause it to vanish. After our usual belated breakfast, we went up over the down for a walk.
Went up the down.
Went up the down, and I saw that the White Moon Pyramids 2 by 2 had been reconstructed, and the processional way stood as it did in ancient days. I wonder what the natives made of the great pylon that showed up against the skyline on the crest of the down. However, there weren't many natives to make anything of it, only a stray crab catcher or two along the rocks, and thatchers cutting reeds in the marsh. I offered no comment on the state of affairs, and Morgan didn't either, and we walked along the ancient way as if we were making a pilgrimage. There is a curious power in silence, when you think alike without words spoken, and each knows the other's thoughts. As long as nothing is said, the thing you are thinking remains another dimension,
Isn't
and
that
is
interesting?
magical. But as soon as you speak it, you lose it.
Mm-hmm.
It is the old story of the jewels bought in the Goblin Market, which you must look only at by moonlight, or you'll find them to be a handful of dead leaves. There is more than one kind of reality, and they won't mix. We passed through the great pylon, and I felt as Caesar must have felt when he crossed the Rubicon. Something was sealed with our passing, and sealed irrevocably. Yet nothing was said as we walked over the short grey sea-down grass, and only the sound of the waves below us and crying of the gulls overhead. It's very curious, the power of silence in another dimension, and very potent. We came to the end of the long sea-down, and below us the weathered limestone of the cliff face fell away in broken buttresses to the steep slope where Trethowan was trying to grow vines. Far down below I could see the narrow beds banked with stone to hold the shallow soil, and edging them the grey aromatic herbs that were infused in the sacred wine that Morgan Le Fay used to make into the stinking incense she sometimes burned. Why, I never knew. Morgan walked down the steeply sloping, treacherous turf that fell away to the sheer drop. I have not been too good ahead for heights, and felt horribly gone in the knees, but I followed her, and we entered a shallow fold of the ground that deepened into a gully as we advanced, and took us down onto a high and giddy ledge that clung like a balcony over the cliff face. It bore the mark of tools and sloped evenly, a yard wide, and presenting no difficulties to a reasonably steady head, provided one did not set foot on a rolling stone. It was a very long time since tools had been used on that high and perilous path, and the weathering limestone had dropped down on its detritus, and all the overhang had caused the heaviest stuff to fall clear. Enough had remained to demand careful walking, and it was no place to come along in the dark. I wondered whether Morgan had risked a neck here, watching the moon rise.
The way sloped down at a steeper pitch than even the War Department had dared to use for its road. But we had not far to go, and presently I saw what I had been expecting to see, the narrow cave mouth, set obliquely in the rock that we had once seen from below as we sat in the vine terraces in the heat of the sultry summer afternoon. Then I had been in my shirt sleeves and Morgan in her blue linen, and now I was clad in a Burberry and Morgan muffled in her furs. It amazed me to remember that then I had been so shy with her that I hardly knew how to address her, and now I was so intimate that I could bicker with her like I did with my sister when she rubbed my fur the wrong way. There is no greater test of intimacy than to be able to have a row with a person without quarreling with them. We went down a short flight of rough but regular steps as we entered the cave, and in the center I saw a rectangular table of solid stone that had evidently been made by the cutting away of natural levels on the floor, hence the steps leading down from the entrance. Round the walls that had been shaped into a semicircle, a low stone edge had been left to serve as a seat. And in the center, facing the entrance, in line with the table stone, was a higher block that looked as if it might serve as a throne, or a seat of the priest. Whether the stone table was an altar or a couch or a slaughtering slab, I couldn't tell, and Morgan didn't tell me. The place had been, I thought, recently swept, for there was no debris of the ages in here like there was on the path that led into it. Then I noticed that on either side of this entrance stood 2 braziers, such as roadmen use, in a recess, and in the recess was a heap of coke, but that means charcoal.
Yeah, coke is like a kind of like coal sort of symbol.
The ceiling was darkened by the fumes which I guessed found their way into the long rift in which it terminated. From the degree of the blackening of the ceiling, I judged that Morgan Le Fay had been here a good deal. She offered me no explanation of anything, but let me look all around at my leisure. Then I saw that near the entrance stood a small portable electric battery with a coil of wire beside it, and the wire went up and terminated in the rock overhead. "What is that for, Morgan?" I said, unable to contain myself any longer, for I knew the use of batteries like that and their tamped-in wires. "That's how I shall shut the door when my work is finished," she said. "And which side of the door shall I be when you shut it?" I said, wondering if this were the substitute for the rising tide. She smiled. "You'll be outside, at a safe distance. Don't be alarmed, Wilfred. I don't intend to make a living sacrifice of you. I want you alive, not dead." "Oh, that's very sweet of you," I said bitterly. Then we walked back the way we had come. The wind was cold. I turned up my coat collar. Morgan snuggled in her furs about her, and we walked fast. We were glad to get within the shelter of the forecourt of the fort, where the banking of the gun and braziers kept off the wind. "Morgan," I said, "when are you going to let me work on the repairs?"
For after the storm we'd simply cleared the court by chucking the debris over the wall into the water, reconstructing nothing, and the place looked a bit battered. Morgan did not answer, but walked on towards the point. A sudden flash of knowledge told me she did not mean to reconstruct it. "If you don't have that underpinning attended to, the end wall will come down in the next storm," I shouted after her. She went on without answering. I turned and went into the house and tried to warm myself by the huge fire of drift that blazed between my beloved dolphins, for I had suddenly realized the cold wind had penetrated to my very bones, and getting chilled, though, is not the best thing.
Getting chilled through.
Getting chilled through is not the best thing for asthma. Being upset, I was sulky, and when she came in, Morgan saw it, but she did not say anything, and neither did I, for I had realized that every time either of us spoke, something went wrong. We ate our Sunday dinner, then slept it off, but it was dusk before anyone was stirring. Morgan went out to the point again, but I did not offer to stir from the fire. "The wind has dropped," she said when she came in. "Glad to hear it," I said. "Moonrise at midnight," said she. We know what phase it's in, then. I said nothing, for I had nothing to say on the subject. We had a kind of high tea, the ideas of which Morgan had borrowed from Yorkshire in the course of her travels. It was pretty exotic according to Dickford standards, where the proper thing for Sunday supper is cold beef, beetroot and blancmange. I had provided crumpets, which I thought were appropriate moon food, being white and flabby. Morgan smiled her strange smile and moved the sausage rolls out of my reach before I had the second. "Tonight's the night," she said. I knew it was, but I never felt less like anything esoteric in my life. I reckoned I should be a washout as a dancing partner or whatever it is she wanted for me. Round about 10, as I was beginning to get sleepy, she began to get active. She produced a kind of kimono made out of coarse white shantung, which I fancy is native woven and native bleached. Anyway, there's a certain roughness of texture and is not dead white. Onto my feet went a pair of pliable rubber sandals, such as bathers use, only painted with silver paint. And on my head, by way of a headdress, went a large loose square of silver lame. After she had arranged it in the appropriate folds, the effect was vaguely Egyptian. Then she handed me an enormous cloak made of heavy curtain velvet in dark indigo blue. It was perfectly circular, and came right down to my heels, and had a hood. There must have been fathoms of material in it. I know it weighed a ton, but I was pretty glad of it before the night was out. It was held at the throat by a massive silver buckle, on which there was a 3-pronged trident, the sea god's sigil. I want you to go out to the cave, she said, and sit there in meditation till moonrise. Then come back here to me. What am I to meditate on? Said I. Whatever comes to you, said she. Wouldn't that be a pretty barren performance? Said I. No, said she. I have been meditating there for the last month. It will not be a barren performance. Try and see. She gave me an electric torch. Keep it under your cloak as you go down the path over the cliff face. I don't want anyone to see the light from the coast, for no one suspects the existence of the path to the cave. I went out. Oh, sorry, did you want to go?
I was going to. Doesn't
okay,
matter.
Go.
I went out, and as she said, the wind had dropped, and there was no longer cold. The moon had not risen yet, but there was a clear starlight from a cloudless sky. I went slowly along, down between the 2 rows of sentinel cairns, and it seemed to me that there was something alive about them, and that they were watching as sentinels watch. To me it was, "Pass, friend," but I would not have envied any stranger my job of going up between those silent watchers. It might have been my imagination, or it might have been the effect of the straining on my eyes in the obscurity through which they loomed half seen, but each appeared to glow towards the apex, and to be crested with a faint white flickering flame. But when I approached the rebuilt pylon, there was no question about it that they were something odd and out of the ordinary. I couldn't actually see anything save dark bulk against the stars, but my heart began to beat as I drew near. There was a most extraordinary sense of electricity in the air. I cannot describe it better than that. And a sort of heat was not heat. I passed through, and it was like entering and coming out of a tunnel from one dimension to another. East of the pylon was another land, an older land, where things were real that are hallucination with us. I noticed that there were no rabbits about. They had all disappeared. It was their feed time, and they should have been there in the thousands, but no rabbit was seen. Maybe a sentinel care had put the fear of God into them, the same way they had unto me. I found the fold of the cliff face easily, though, enough, being guided thereto by the cairns. I was not as bad by night as I was by day, for I could not see the drop beneath me. I got down to the path all right, and picked my way pretty cautiously over the uneven surface. Then I saw a dull red glow among the rocks, and I knew that the cave was there, and that it was lit up. I passed through the narrow slanting entrance, and found that the glow came from the 2 big braziers that were alight, and stoked to the brim with coke. It was pleasantly warm inside, and the fumes disappearing into the lofty crevice of the roof that gave no trouble. A curious rug of Morgans, made of skins of the white Samoyeds,
I guess,
lay over the throne-like stone, which I took to be the seat of the priest, and on this I sat and commenced my vigil. I remembered that dogs are sacred to Diana, who is likewise the moon, the ruler of the tides of flux and reflux. I wondered what the tide was doing. I wish I had noted. I fancied it was going out. Except for the faint crackling of the burning coke, there was no sound in the cave, for the wind had dropped, and no traffic moving among the marshes at night. Then I heard faint and far off the lowing of a calving cow. And in some odd way, it was not appropriate, for Luna is also Isis, who is also Hathor under another form, and the horns upon her brow are interchangeable with the crescent moon. The cow lowed intermittently as the birth went on, and then was quiet, and I guessed that there was a new life in the world. After that, there was nothing but the crackling of the coke, and I sank deeper into meditation.
I felt very much the priest, sitting there on the curious stone throne with the dark folds of my heavy velvet cloak about me and my silver sandals showing under the hem. I had thrown back the hood, and the folds of the soft silvery stuff of my headdress fell down straight on either side of my face. I laid my hands along my thighs after the manner of the gods of Egypt and gave myself up to meditation. I could tell at once that much magical work had been done here, for the images rose and flowed with spontaneous ease and abnormal vividness. Incense had been scattered on the coke, and as the fire worked its way through, a scented smoke began to rise and take on curious shapes as it eddied in the draughts of the cave. And I saw faces in it as I'd seen in the faces of the waves. I had an odd feeling that the other cave in Bell Knoll was all lit up and that Virgil was being kept there also, although, with my rational mind, I knew that it was long since filled with the fallen earth of ages. But my rational mind was in abeyance that night, and things were real to me I would not normally have called illusion, and all my mundane life had ceased to be. I was the priest keeping vigil, and I was concerned with things that were not of this world. With what was I left of my intelligence? I pulled myself together and tried to do my duty by the meditation. I visualized the country stretched out below the cave as I'd seen in the previous visions, and I tried to project myself back into them, but it wouldn't work. The memory pictured had none of the vividness of vision, but were dead and in 2 dimensions only, without depth, like painted canvas. I saw that the conscious effort was a mistake, and sat still and let the pictures form as they would.
The marsh and its waterways faded, and were replaced by the deep blue of the night sky, and it was starless. A faint silvery haze appeared at the center and began to spread, and formed into bands like rings of Saturn. Then long shafts of light were wheeling searchlights cut by the sky, and everything began to swing round and revolve upon itself. And as I watched the stars and the sun swung into being, keeping station like ships in a line, and I heard the machinery of the universe take up its marvelous rhythm, synchronized, synthesized, and through all moved the station-keeping stars. And there were harp notes in it, sweet arpeggios, and strong gongs calling through the deep space like stars that were speaking to one another. And I waited and listened for the shouting of the joy of the sons of God that should be rung out over it all. But there was silence, and I knew that something was lacking, something to which Morgan and I held the keys. To each sphere of the heavens is assigned a vision, so Morgan had told me that the sphere of the moon is assigned the vision of the machinery of the universe, and this, I thought, was what I must be seeing. I watched that vast machine working like a dynamo, more organic than mechanical, and with sensitivities of a living thing. And I saw life begin, and the tides of life move like the water having no form. They swept backwards and forwards like the tides of an estuary off the bellhead, and it seemed to me that the beginning of the form seemed in them like the seaweed streams in the sea. I felt this particular tidal rhythm was in all things like a great breathing, and I remembered that the moon was called Our Lady of the Rhythm and the ruler of the tides of life. There rose to my mind one of Morgan's songs, to which she had plagued me with all too sweet torment. I am that soundless, boundless, bitter sea. All tides are mine and answer unto me. Tides of the airs, tides of inner earth, the secret silent tide of death and rebirth. Tides of men's souls and dreams and destiny, Isis veiled and Ea Binagi.
Isis veiled, I knew, was Our Lady of Nature, just as Isis unveiled is the heavenly Isis. Ea was the soul of space and parent of time, older even than the Titans. Binah, the dark, sterile mother of all, was the great sea whence life arose, the female principle and pre-matter. And Gi herself was the magnetic earth that is like an aura to our globe, and in which moves the tides of the eastern core tattvas. These things I knew, for Morgan had already told me. Then I realized I was now watching them. How long would I have waited and watched? I do not know. But the rim of the rising moon cut the edge of Bell Knoll, and the first beam of the moon dawn fell full on my face as I sat on the throne of the priests. I rose and went up by the giddy way that clung to the eaves of the cliff, and along the down where the sentinel cairns stood white in the light of the moon. There was no wind, and I could hear the sea below me, and I knew by the sound of its far-off voice that it was at ebb and calm. Well, it's getting fascinating.
Yarp.
We're up to chapter 25 now. Goodness gracious
much more
me.
to go here.
Well, it's either going to be one or two goes more, I think. It's getting interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no chapter listed. You have to just go with it.
You just have to go with the flow. So we'll go with the flow. But that was an hour.
Chapter 32, so we've got less than 10 chapters.
It's probably 2 sessions. I think we could do 5, maybe, depending.
I don't know. 2 or 3 sessions.
2 or 3.
And
we'll
then
see
we'll be
how
on
it
to the
goes.
next book.
Yes, we will.
All right, my
so
lovelies.
Thank you
to
for
Sean and Helena and Jess
and Wendy.
Hope you
anybody
enjoyed
else who's joining us later or whatever time it is, because that's the thing. You can time shift this to suit your day. So thank you for joining us for our wonderful installment, and we'll see you
Peace and
next
blessings.
time.
Bye.
Blessed be. Bye.